Hi everyone and welcome back to Ask Ornstein. This week's episode is a Mesut Ozil special, with the exiled playmaker finally ending his rollercoaster 7.5-year stay at Arsenal. We've been inundated with questions and I'll try and cover each of the main talking points. Thanks again for all of your input. If you haven't signed up to The Athletic yet, now is a great time with our special January sales offer of less than £1 or $1 a week. Just go to theathletic.com/Ask Ornstein. As always, the site is packed with great content, and given we're talking about Ozil, I'd urge you to go and check out our in-depth look at where it all went wrong for the German. Support for Ask Ornstein is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code ASK, that's ASK, at checkout. Okay, the most important place to start when explaining the Mesut Ozil situation is the new contract he signed in January 2018. But we mustn't forget that even in the build-up to that, not all was rosy. There was fierce debate about whether or not he should receive that deal, fierce debate about his performances for all the good moments that he and Arsenal enjoyed. There were plenty of bad ones as well. Although I do remember going into that January, his form did pick up significantly and there was plenty of support among the Arsenal fan base and the media. And with Alexis Sanchez moving to Manchester United, the possibility of Ozil leaving as a free agent the following summer, to an extent Arsenal felt they were left with no choice, even if it meant giving Ozil a weekly wage of around £350,000. They just couldn't countenance the idea of both star names leaving within the space of 6 months for very little in return. There were some high up at the club who weren't supportive of it, but ultimately they went ahead with it. Arsene Wenger, manager at the time, Ivan Gazidis, chief executive, Dick Law, contracts negotiator, and at the top of the tree, the Kroenkes, the owners. And Josh Kroenke, the director, was at London Colney the day Ozil put pen to paper. It was the same day that they signed Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang from Borussia Dortmund. I don't remember a great deal of criticism at the time. In fact, I remember a lot of celebration. But in the end, it has come to be seen as a millstone that has hung heavily around Arsenal's neck. Once the ink had dried, Ozil's output appeared to dip, but we should say that isn't completely uncommon. In fact, Arsenal have seen it just recently with Aubameyang himself. Now, I've got no idea if a new contract and on-field displays have any correlation, but in those cases, it tends to take time. Aubameyang's just coming back into the goals now, and if we apply the same sort of period to Ozil, well, that was when it was announced that Arsene Wenger was leaving the club after 22 years as manager. He was the man who brought Ozil in from Real Madrid, was such an important factor in Ozil's decision, would put an arm around him, knew what buttons to press, knew how to get the best out of him. And with him gone, it seems that everything changed for Ozil. That summer was heavily disrupted. Ozil was part of Germany's disastrous World Cup campaign, held accountable in some quarters, and decided to retire from international football amid a huge racism storm. Of course, Arsenal welcomed him back in with open arms. He arrived onto their pre-season tour, but by that point it was Unai Emery as head coach, with a very different setup taking shape. Emery had tried to sign Ozil when he was Paris Saint-Germain coach, and Ozil was going into the last 6 months of his contract and therefore free to speak to overseas clubs. It of course didn't happen, but it indicated that perhaps they would work well together. Though that said, there were suggestions from Paris that Emery was not so adept at dealing with big personalities such as Neymar. And despite naming Ozil among his leadership group, fairly quickly cracks began to emerge. That August, Arsenal travelled to Chelsea. We understand that on the day of the game, Emery explained to Ozil there was a good chance he would not be selected for this away match that might require a lot of physicality and defensive resilience, but that Ozil responded positively, said he wanted to play. Emery was encouraged by that response, picked him in the starting lineup, but when Ozil was substituted, he left the field despondently, and to me and many others, that said a lot about what was happening on the inside at the time. I think there was a similar incident soon afterwards, but on the flip side, when Arsenal welcomed Leicester, Emery named Ozil as captain and he was magnificent. Then again, in the post-match press conference, Emery sort of challenged Ozil to produce that level on a consistent basis. And we're told that privately, Emery warned Ozil that he shouldn't get carried away by just one performance, which I don't think went down particularly well. In Arsenal's next Premier League game away to Crystal Palace, Ozil was captain again, but again left the field despondently when he was substituted, which became a bit of an on-running theme, their up and down relationship. And I think by the turn of the year, Unai Emery was of the view that it would be in the best interests of all parties if he was to move on. But Ozil had no intention of leaving. He went on to play in the Europa League final. He, like the team, did not do well. He was replaced by Joe Willock, and that was almost like a sign to many people that Ozil's time was done, but it certainly wasn't. Shortly before the 2019-20 season, Ozil was the victim of an attempted carjacking, along with his wife and teammate Sead Kolasinac. Both players were given time off, but Kolasinac was reintegrated quicker, and that left an impression that perhaps Ozil was simply not a part of Emery's plans. I have heard about some heated exchanges in Emery's office, with the coach demanding higher standards and levels, wanting more from his player in training and matches, and Ozil demanding that Emery show him greater respect, so there was tension there. But with results deteriorating and pressure mounting on Emery, he did lean upon Ozil again, though it wasn't enough to save him his job. He was sacked and Ozil had outlasted him. Freddie Ljungberg was placed in temporary charge. He gave Ozil some opportunities, but he also showed him a hardline stance. When he was substituted, dropped his gloves to the ground and kicked them away. Ljungberg didn't pick him for the next match, which proved to be his final game in interim charge away at Everton. That was the same month that Ozil went public in his support of the Uyghur Muslims in China. That caused Arsenal quite a few issues, politically and commercially. They released a statement distancing themselves from his comments, and no doubt that added to the antagonism. Mikel Arteta was placed in charge of the team, and he spoke incredibly well about Ozil at the beginning. He started him in all 10 of his Premier League games before football was shut down because of the coronavirus, and it seemed then that Ozil was firmly back in the frame. During lockdown, Ozil became a father for the first time. He also rejected the Arsenal squad pay cuts, reportedly the only player to do so, although in an interview I did with him in August, he laid out his reasons and said he thought there were others too. Whatever happened behind the scenes, the fact is he didn't play a single second of competitive football for Arsenal again. Initially he was in some of the matchday squads, but that became less and less frequent. Mikel Arteta always said it was purely down to football reasons and that it had nothing to do with the pay cut. There was plenty of speculation to the contrary. Arsenal approached his representatives during the summer transfer window to try and find a solution. They made clear that his game time would be very limited, but to my knowledge they didn't suggest paying out his contract or raise the possibility that he might not be registered for the Premier League or Europa League squads. As we understand it, that only happened shortly before the transfer window closed, leaving very little time to try and structure a move away, and Ozil, crucially, was left angry. Until this point, I think Ozil truly believed he would eventually work his way back into the picture in some form like he had done in the past and stay until the final day of his contract like he always said he would. But having been left off of the Premier League and Europa League lists with very little prospect of that changing in the second half of the season, the writing was on the wall, and crucially they now had more time to do a deal. There was interest from Turkey, America, Italy, Qatar, but you sensed his preference was Fenerbahce, and so it proved. As we reported on The Athletic, Ozil was owed around £7 million by Arsenal. He was prepared to leave some of that on the table. We think that has happened, we just don't know how much it is. I don't expect it's a huge amount. It may depend on how much Fenerbahce are able to pay now as opposed to the summer, and if they can't do much until the summer, then he would naturally expect most of his money now. We do think that all of the loyalty bonuses and agents' fees have already been paid, so it may only be a relatively small financial saving for Arsenal, and of course they don't free up a space in their squad because he's not in the squad, but crucially it allows them to draw a line under this whole episode and move on. It raises the financial burden off of their shoulders going forward. He gets an amount of money and gets to go and play football, potentially compete for a place in next season's Champions League, and Fenerbahce get a player that they've always wanted. So it seems to be a situation that suits everyone. When it comes to popularity in the dressing room around the club, it's a really difficult one to answer because it largely depends on who you speak to and their personal experience. It's clear that Ozil has a very good relationship with the likes of Mustafi, Kolasinac, Guendouzi, some of the younger players who have grown up admiring him. You only need to look at public comments recently from the likes of Arsene Wenger, Jack Wilshere, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang on social media. But in every club, organisation, place of work, there will always be people, be it teammates, executives, staff members, who have a very different opinion. We've all heard suggestions that Ozil's a bad trainer, that he doesn't display the right body language, that he doesn't live up to expected standards of behaviour. But we've also heard that Ozil has trained the same way throughout his whole career, his body language has never changed, and that he's a very generous, kind and polite person who has never received a fine in his time at Arsenal. So like with everything in the Ozil debate, he splits opinion. He is an enigma, you could say. I've had the privilege of interviewing him a couple of times, and I've always found him very straight, honest, direct and authentic. But again, that's just my personal view. And so on this one, I'm going to sit firmly on the fence. Support for Ask Ornstein is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. The world is about to get a lot less hairy because you can now buy Manscaped products and finally use the right tools for your family jewels, like the Lawnmower 3.0 electric trimmer with its cutting-edge ceramic blade that reduces grooming accidents and keeps you feeling smooth. Its battery lasts up to 90 minutes, so you can even use it for the entire length of a football match. Then comes the Weed Whacker, your essential nose and ear hair trimmer. Both products are part of the Manscaped Performance Package that includes a t-shirt, athletic boxer briefs, deodorant, toner for, yes, down below, a wash bag to keep it all together, and a newspaper. Why? Well, why not? Happy shaving!